In this video, I'd like to present the work of architect George Brown Post, or George B. Post, looking at the entire concept of architecture in the 1800s, early 1900s. Through the Old World lens, we come to realize that many of the architects of renown have been assigned these works from the Old World, when in fact they really didn't. Maybe they drew the plans after the fact, but it appears that these buildings are much older and coming from a previous civilization. And that's what we propose in this community, and I think Mr. George B. Post is another one of those architects that needs to be put under the microscope. And he's born in 1837, dies in 1913, despite the fact that he lives until 1913. This is really the only photograph we are given of the gentleman. And if you want to get really picky, here's the other one I could find. The short story with him is that he graduates from New York University 1858 with a civil engineering degree and becomes a student of Richard Morris Hunt, another architect that needs to be looked at. He fights in the American Civil War, and by the time 1867 rolls around, he decides he's going to open his own architectural firm. And what you are going to see now are examples of his work, many of them no longer standing. And we begin with the marvelous Erie County Savings and Loan Bank in Buffalo, New York. Most of these are in New York, New Jersey area, although there are some outliers. You can see here it was demolished in 1968. A rather infamous tale of demolition can be found online of how long it took them to demolish this thing, much longer than they expected it to take. Built in 1893, we are told. And this just gives you a sense of the scale of the architecture itself and the ornamentation. And this one, standing for about 70 years, actually ends up being one of his longer durations on his buildings. Here's a still shot of the demolition that took place there. And this is a drawing of the Troy Savings Bank Music Hall in Troy, New York. It still stands, and here's a look at it in the modern day. And you can see the interior here with the pipe organ. And we've talked about the pipe organ many times on this channel, having a strong link with the old world civilization, the old way of being here. And at this point in time, when this is supposedly constructed, the transfer from the old world to the new world and the repurposing of these structures for different purposes. I don't believe that this was built in between 1871 and 1875 and had a pipe organ installed in it for the purpose of entertaining people in this music hall. I think this is a repurposing that's gone on. There's a nice shot of the music hall in the background there, and in the foreground we're getting a nice look at the technology available, looks like, to fight fires at the time. So there's again that juxtaposition between the paltry means that they had at their disposable when compared to the modern day, and the massive, elaborate and ornate, decadent architecture from that time period. There's a disconnect between the two, and that's what I'm trying to highlight here on this channel. The Marquand Gymnasium in Princeton University You can see the very short duration on this timeline. We have a 37-year timeline on this one. And that, again, is one of the things that leads me to believe that this build date has been manufactured, and that this structure is much older than history tells us it is. And that's why it seems so curious when you see a lot of these structures having only stood for several decades and then being torn down or destroyed in a fire or what have you. These are looking like chateau-esque castles that, if they were in Europe, they would be labeled as 200, 300 years old, but it doesn't fit our narrative here in North America. So we get the short duration and the fake architect. And I'm not saying he wasn't a real person. He very well could have been. I don't know. But I don't think he had a hand in designing these structures, and I don't think they were built at the time they say they were built. We have the Borough Hall in the Bronx, New York. Again, you have a similar duration to the Erie Savings building. Quite spectacular. You have a ground entrance here as well. This is no small feat at that early time period to be doing anything below grade like this. We have the Center for Brooklyn History, which still stands. Have a couple modern day shots, and this again gives you a very good idea of the quality of building materials that were used at this early time period. Hard to tell when I show you this exactly what's going on with the materials here, but when you have a look at it in the modern day, you can really tell how well this stuff stands the test of time. Another reason, no doubt, that many of these were demolished. And you have a very plain and basic looking sign here telling us that this is the Long Island Historical Society. Even the spacing on the lettering does, and the R looks crooked here. So really not matching the perfection going on below the lettering here. And that's just a look at the interior of this structure. So I want you to think about that, the difference between this shabby sign and the magnificence of the architecture we're witnessing here. And I always like to mention the purpose of these videos is to put all of these in one place for you, the viewer, as a bit of an archive. So I think it's helpful to document all of this while we can, while it's available on the line. You can see here this is Chickering Hall, 1875 to 1901, 26-year lifespan on this thing. 26 years. There we have again the pipe organs, which I'm sure Mr. Post was very good at including in his designs. I try to envision the work that would go on to try to finish a building like this with such a vertical element to it. This is one of the problems I have with the old architecture with the very high ceilings, is the amount of falsework scaffolding that would have to be erected on the interior to finish these in the manner that they did. Really doesn't, again, it doesn't make a lot of sense, especially sometimes when you get these very short timelines, which we will see as well in this presentation. Very unbelievably short timelines. There it is, Chickering Hall again. Not lasting long at all. And again, you see the the carts, and you get the brick paved roads. A real disconnect between the modes of transportation and the infrastructure available at the time. The City College of New York, built in 1903 to 1907, we are told. Between 1903 and 1907, and we do have some modern shots of this for you as well. Again, looking like it could be 500 years old easily. Pretty incredible architecture. And you're seeing a wide variety of styles coming from this one individual as well, which should cause you to question it a little bit as well, I think. Having a real church feel. This one you can see something looks like it's been removed from these areas here. Sometimes you'll see statues with the little covering and the little pedestal there, but we don't see that here. And I'd also like to point out that what I'm showing you most of the time in these videos are the above ground situation, and what we are finding out as time progresses is that there are plentiful undergrounds, tunnel systems, multi-storied basements that are attached with many of these old world structures. Again, one of those things that certainly does not fit the narrative. This is Cleveland Trust Company building. I don't have a date of construction on this one. It does still stand, looking rather out of place next to the modern skyscrapers surrounding it. And you can see again that ornamentation. You get this fence line along the roofs as well, which is indicative of these old world structures. Really sticks out like a sore thumb. And again, you have the sign not really fitting in with its surroundings. And a little shot of the underside of the dome for you as well. What kind of scenes do we have around here? Looking likely that these are also repainted and not fitting the majesty of the architecture itself. This is the Havemeyer building, built in 1891, we're told. Demolished, I couldn't find the date, but let's look a little closer. And I wish we had a better photo of this. I had trouble finding it. You can see what's going on here at the top, I hope, even though it's quite grainy, as you get all these statues holding up this balcony or bump out, whatever you want to call it, for the floor above it. Really, really, really absurd notion to be building like that at that time period, especially, or any time period. It's frivolous and really complicates the situation for finishing off the building in the upper reaches. And here we have another look at that. Not much remains of that one. And there it is again. Everything looking very, very old around here. Old and sort of squished in together. Then we get a church, Reformed Church in High Bridge, New Jersey. But we'll move past that to the Library and Lyceum in Morristown, New Jersey. Again, you have a very short duration in its existence. There it is, partially destroyed by fire. I have a grab from 1913. The fire occurred here. Let's see if these guys are wondering if we're going to catch on somewhere down through time. They've got their mercury-lined hats, keeping them in check. And there's the fire in the background. And of course the old fire truck's not really making a dent in anything at that time period. The Marvelous Manufacturers and Liberal Arts building at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago from 1893. Of course, this one temporary, as most of them were, all built to be temporary, we are told. Just a massive, massive structure. Here's a look at the interior of that. How many people could you fit in there? Hundreds of thousands of people, I would suggest, could fit in this massive structure. All of these building materials temporary. Paper mache, lath and plaster, lath and staff, so we're told. Doesn't matter how many debunking videos you try to make about it. Use your eyes to really understand what you're looking at here. There's no way this could be temporary with the structure that you see above here. It doesn't even make sense. Completely illogical. And there's a nice look for you too. And we know it's from that time period because they like to put that on the bridge there for us. The date. Just in case you start with thinking it's older or it's been around any longer. Very, very ornate. The Mills Building in New York. Again, a short duration, 1925. Many of these coming down in that early 1900s. Remember we said he lived until 1913. What you have to wonder is, did they just start tearing him down after he was dead? Like immediately after? There's another look at it. A little street scene of the time period for you. So many of these buildings are no longer standing, and I would suspect how many we can't even find in picture form. There's a look at the front gate for you. The Gilded Age of New York. That's all it was just a lot of money. Mortimer Building in New York. J.P. Morgan and Company Stock Exchange. Built in 1885 in 9 months is all it took to build this thing. Of course, they demolished it right after he died again, 1919. It's the structure here in the front. And of course, we know it was built then because we have floor plans. And that's supposedly proof that they did design and build it at that time. Anybody can do a drawing after the fact, after the building has been constructed. Just so you know. And there's another look at the Mortimer Building. Remember, 9-month build in the 1880s. Those superhumans of New York City were able to throw these things up. You can imagine the Italian gentlemen on the scaffold throwing the bricks and stone up to each other, catching it, singing their songs as they lay the bricks and stone. Is that what we're supposed to believe? Here's the demolition. Here's where they took it out. Extracted it. Like a tooth. And we move on to the Mutual Benefit Building in New Jersey. I don't know whose benefit it is, mutually speaking, but none of this is done for our benefit. Demolished it in the 20s, built in 1904. Very short time period here. Pretty much a ghost of a building. I could really find no photos, just a couple depictions, postcards. And again, this is showing you the brick paved streets, the infrastructure from that early time period. Mutual Benefit Life Insurance Building in Newark, New Jersey. Alright, we get to several exchange buildings. All magnificent, in my estimation. Again, look at the timeline. We're noticing a theme here. So again, I think that they've attributed a lot of these old world structures to this gentleman, given us a false start date, and did a lot of demolishing here in the early 1900s. This is the Cotton Exchange. And we get a drawing of what life was like in the old New York Cotton Exchange. Again, the hats. Everybody getting the metals, the toxic metals leaching into their systems, affecting their functioning, brain function. No question it helped with the controllers, cementing the narrative. Another look at the floor of the Cotton Exchange. I find this one a bit creepy. High ceilings again, though. Moving on to the Produce Exchange. This is an amazing one, too. This is a high-res photo for you as well. New York Produce Exchange, built 81 to 84, 3 years in the 1880s. Okay. Demolished 1957. Let's get a little closer. You can get right in on the detail on this one. You have, what, 3 tiers of column going in here to the arches. You have the ship's hull protruding from the corners. Really, really something special. And there's one of the construction workers that still working on it, is he? Just touch-ups at this point, of course. Just touch-ups. Let's look at the tower. Absolutely incredible. What an absolute shame that they tore this thing down. Really is a criminal act, as far as I'm concerned. in one breath we celebrate these architects, and in the other breath we tear their work down. So which one is it? You can't really have both. The Produce Exchange, the New York Produce Exchange. And moving on to the New York Stock Exchange, opened in 1903. This one still stands. We will move on to a crisper depiction of this. Again, you're having all the capitals of the columns adorned with acanthus leaf, spectacular dental moldings, and a lot of very interesting statue work. This gives you a sense again of how high the ceilings are. And of course, if they built this in the modern day, it would be drop ceiling, 8-9 feet high with fluorescent lights. That's not how they did it back then. There's a nice look at how decorated this thing is. A lot of people in there as well. A modern look before we move on. Again, you're getting the contrast of old world and new back here. The energetics of it is very different. And again, the sign not looking like it fits. Moving on to the New York Times building, or 41 Park Row. It's also this one here in the foreground. Built in 1889. Still stands apparently, although it has been heavily modified. Let's look at the difference between modern day and past. Here is the past. I want you to remember this building line here. And where do we draw the line? How much of it has been taken down? Let's look again. There's the small windows. There's the long windows. I think they've gotten rid of this section. There are the small... No, it's still there. And 1, 2... It's definitely been modified. They've taken off the mansard top. And they've done a little bit of messing around up here. Always the modification. This is the New York World building. Built in about 14 months. Demolished in the 50s. You can find this one in my second 101 demolished buildings of Old World North America. There's several in here that you'll find in those books. If you enjoy this type of stuff, I certainly recommend you check those out. They're nice to have. They're good conversation starters for people that haven't really looked into the majesty of the Old World architecture. Many of us are itching for a conversation where we get excited when we look at this architecture and we understand that it doesn't fit the historical narrative, but sometimes we just need an icebreaker to start the conversation off. And the icebreaker doesn't always work out when you say, well, I know this YouTube channel. And that's what the books were. That's why I created the books, is to help with that process. And as a way for you to have that in your possession, have these visuals in your possession. This is part of the demolition process. And you could mistake that for a construction photo, but that's part of the demolition process. Alright, the old New York Hospital, Mr. G.B. Post, architect. There's another look at it. Don't have a lot of info on this one. Did find a couple pictures and drawings. We have a stock exchange in Montreal, so heading north of the border for this one. And a little bit of work in Pittsburgh, the Park Building in Pittsburgh, built in 1896. So early skyscrapers, I didn't mention that earlier, a large part of Mr. Post's work. And this one still stands, and here's a little look at the statues holding up, again, the structure above. So these would be structural statues. And still in very, very good shape. Again, look at the quality of the work itself, standing the test of time. And those are up here, I believe. Right near the top. Alright, hold on to your hats. We're about to look at the Prudential headquarters in New Jersey. And no, this one does not still stand. And we're told this one was built in 1892. And they took the wrecking ball to it in 1956. So if you were around in the first half of the 20th century, you had a castle in the middle of New Jersey. Middle of Newark, New Jersey. All for a little bit of insurance. Yeah, it's always the banks and the insurance companies and the governmental organizations and the religions, the real power structure in our reality, claiming these old structures. Or if you believe the mainstream narrative, you believe that these things were being built because we had genius architects, and a genius architect could have their vision seen through to completion just based on the fact that there are plenty of immigrants around to complete the job. But this is the quality of architecture we're talking about for this time period. Very high quality. The St. Paul building, New York, 1898 to 1958. We're sensing a pattern here with the time frame on a lot of these. Early skyscraper. There it is again in the background, surrounded by all sorts of other old world splendor. I have not done a video on New York or Chicago yet on my channel. I've covered most other major cities in North America. Reason being is that there's so much. It's sort of intimidating to attempt to dive into even. So we've seen snippets of it in videos like this. I think that's coming one day. That would take quite a bit of time and energy to do the research. The Equitable Life building in Manhattan, 1870 to 1912. Again, they didn't even wait for him to die. Oh, maybe he died, and maybe they didn't. Actually, they didn't tear it down. Apparently, it burned, and then it froze. I guess because all the water that you. Yeah. Anyway, there's another look at it. Very interesting. Not looking like a lot of fun at all there. There's an issue here with the top as well. This is supposedly a look at it after they were fighting the fire. If I go back to this one, let me have a look. Okay. All of the roof part is gone, and all you're seeing is this part here. That's what it was. And there's a nice look at the magnificent iron gated front of the building. And we have a little bit of the interior to whet your appetite as well, if you're into this old architecture, like I am. Look at the detail here. Oh my. And another depiction of the fire. And we're coming to the end of the file. A few more buildings to take a look at. We begin the beginning of the end with the Union Trust building. I couldn't find a date of demolition for this one. We have a 2-year build date, of course, and it was easy. These were easy to put up back at that time period. There's a little look at. A lot of times too with these structures, you have to think, when was this one built, or when was this one built around it? Are we to believe that they just squeezed them in like that? It feels like it's all part of the same timeline. It's easy to take one out, I suppose, but then putting one in there after the fact take quite a bit of planning, I would suspect. And then you have the graveyard in the foreground and the old Union Trust building not long for the graveyard itself at this point, I would suspect. Oh, or the Vanderbilt mansion, Cornelius Vanderbilt. Again, you're looking at a very similar timeline. Poor Mr. George B. Post really did not travel well down through time. They didn't like his buildings. And we do have some shots of this. Of course, the Vanderbilt family, one of the major robber baron families from that era. These again looking like 400-year-old chateaus from France, but that's just how good they were apparently at construction and imitation work. And apologies for the quality of some of these pictures, some of the interior I had to scrounge around for, but I think you can get a sense of the architecture going on in this mansion, and of course all the statues that they stole, they hoarded. The robber barons, that's why they're called the robber barons. Oh, the paintings, ceiling paintings again, right? That was normal as well, I guess, for them to do in the Gilded Age, is have ceiling painters. Never mind Michelangelo. Is it Michelangelo? The Sistine Chapel. This was going on everywhere, right? Alright, the Vincent Building, also in New York. Couldn't find much on that one. One of my favorites of all time. The Western Union Telegraph Building, New York. Built in 1875, demolished right after he dies. Yeah, definitely trigger happy with that wrecking ball in New York in that second decade of the 20th century. Look at the ornamentation. Look at all this on top. The tech, the Antiquitech. I don't think that's a clock. I don't know what that's supposed to be. The circular gate on top. Magnificent structure. 40 years for this world before they decided to tear this sucker down. And Williamsburg Savings Bank in Brooklyn still stands. There it is in the modern day. Not a bad looking building. You can see why they would let that one slip through the cracks, but couldn't let the big one slip through the cracks unless you had a really good excuse for it, like a state capitol. And Wisconsin Capitol building is, you got George B. Post's name all over it. And it really is something else, this one as well. And with any sort of major building like this, we usually do get a small handful of construction photos, and this would be one of them. And we have talked on this channel about the quality of construction photos and the ability for them to forge these things down through time as well. And this one I also find looks suspect, looking like we have a foreground and a background that don't match, and we certainly have a vanilla sky. Make of that what you will. Another really poor quality photograph. Not even sure what's going on here. Well, look at some of the interior. Certainly doesn't match what we see in the construction photos. It's interesting too that he gets his hands in Wisconsin before he kicks off. Everything else we've seen, as I mentioned, coming from that New York, New Jersey area. So what do you think? George B. Post, do you think he was a real guy designing these buildings? And these things were just going up everywhere? Or do you think there's more to the story? Let me know in the comments. This has been an old world exploration. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe, hit the thumbs up button, and comment. I believe we are in the process of remembering who we really are and casting off the shackles of illusion. Until next time.